Welcome back to the Metropolitan Culture Corner after a short break last month. As you probably already know, this interview series highlights the stories of some of the fascinating figures from the local, national, and international worlds of art and culture. And I have been lucky to have had the opportunity to interview everyone from Grammy-nominated musicians to famous chefs, from lighting designers who work with the Liceu Opera to documentary directors, from award-winning authors and journalists to historians, so much more. If you've watched previous installments of the series, then you know that usually we tend to lean towards the world of literature, art, music, but culture is many things. It's multifaceted, and one of the facets that we haven't covered very often is that of social and political activism. So this month, I thought it was both timely and appropriate to go behind the scenes with Chris Reilly, who is deeply involved in the world of expat political activism here in Barcelona. Born in the UK, Chris's professional life has taken him all over the world, all across Asia to the United States, to multiple countries in continental Europe, working in business development and senior sales roles, specifically in the fields of new technologies and media. In 2009, his work brought him and his family here to Barcelona, where he became heavily involved in the nonprofit organization Democrats Abroad. He was elected chair or president of Democrats Abroad not once but twice, and is a recognizable figure at fundraising and get out the vote events around the city. Now, if you're thinking, hang on, Chris Reilly was born in the UK and is working with American Democrats Abroad. During all the international adventures that I mentioned, one of the professional opportunities that came his way led him to the United States, where he became a green card holder and eventually a naturalized American citizen in the year 2001. So even though Chris was born in the UK and preserves his lovely British accent, he is an American citizen by choice and has been one for over 25 years. Chris was also fascinated by the American political system and studied it in school for several years, so his insight is based on his personal experiences as well as his academic knowledge of the US political system. Chris has also worked for other socially and politically minded organizations, for example, Article 19, an entity dedicated to defending access to information, freedom of speech, protection of privacy, protection of journalists and the free press, protection of human rights, and all kinds of fundamental stuff that is truly important for all of us humans living here in the world. I wanted to interview Chris because not only is he an interesting individual in his own right, but the work he has done and continues to do is ever more important in today's fraught political climate. Please welcome Chris Reilly to the Metropolitan Culture Corner. I met you through Democrats Abroad, and a lot of the things I want to ask you have to do with Democrats Abroad. I wanted to ask you how you got involved with them in the first place. Like when you landed in Barcelona, was that part of the plan, or is this something you just accidentally fell into?
I've always had a bit of an interest in politics. I became a US citizen a few months before the 9/11 attacks. We were living in San Francisco then, and I had to think about whether I was going to be a citizen and what that meant. And the thing that pushed me over the top was I felt that if you wanted to moan about the US, you needed to be on the same team as everyone else. I became a citizen, and then many years later, we came to live in Barcelona, and we heard pretty quickly about Democrats Abroad, mainly because we'd been expatriates before in Asia, where there were also Democrats Abroad chapters, but we really only engaged with it initially to meet a few people, to broaden our network.
For the edification of the audience, when there's not like a massive election coming up, what does Democrats Abroad do most of the time? Networking events, lobbying?
Well, right now they're very busy, but back then they'd have regular meetings. The first meeting I went to, maybe there were 8 or 9 people, and there'd be conversations about what was going on politically in the US. Generally, there was always planning either towards midterm elections or towards a general election. The primary role of Democrats Abroad is to basically help US citizens living overseas to register and then to vote at election time. Many of them don't even know that they have that right, many Americans living abroad. And so that's the primary role. So to answer your question, not much going on a lot of the time. The real busy, crazy busy time would be the 2 or 3 months leading up to one of those election periods. And then it would be all hands on deck.
During this particular election cycle, I know you were no longer the chair at the time, but you just come from being the chair and you were still heavily involved. So what was the experience like trying to get out the vote in the months preceding the most recent presidential election versus other times when you've been involved?
There are limits to the terms. The maximum I could do was 4 years, and so I did 4 years. I mean, everyone's elected. The 2 main ones that I've been involved in were 20 and 24. for. We started getting more involved with the whole thing in 2016 when Trump came on the scene. I had worked in commercial property in New York City before. My office was across the street from Donald Trump's office, and I felt that if he got to be president, then it would be kind of tragic. So that was the beginning of my involvement, although I wasn't heavily involved then. But then by 2020, I was thinking, we've really got to get this guy out.
If you were working in commercial property and your office was right there, you have insight that I don't have. So why would it be tragic? Most people, they haven't had the experience of seeing the actual human being up close.
First off, I never actually met him directly. I was in the same room as him a couple of times. I was on a couple of conference calls that he was on. I would say he's much taller than you expect. But a lot of people I knew did know him. And the world of commercial real estate in New York City is pretty brutal. And he was kind of at the top of it. When I say brutal, these guys would do anything to get their deal and to get their commission or their payment over the line. And I would say that he's a champion of that. Mm-hmm. It makes him a great animal for doing real estate deals. But is he the right person to be running an amazing country like the US with all of its richness and different issues, ingredients that make up this gigantic American cake? No, I really felt very strongly that he was not the right guy because of a lack of qualification and experience.
What do you say to people who say, well, running a company is the same thing as running a country, it's just bigger?
A conglomerate that has many different aspects to it. Maybe running something like that might qualify you, but he came from a dog-eat-dog world of commercial real estate and he sees everything in the context of the deal. To me, it's become more apparent the second time around, and people say to me, well, what would be your insight on Donald Trump? I'd say, well, go and watch the movie Glenn Ross. Mm-hmm. Imagine the character played by Alec Baldwin, who kind of ironically was also famous for his skits on Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live. The guy that Alec Baldwin portrayed in Glenn Ross, to some extent, is a representation of how Trump is in reality.
For people who aren't familiar with the character?
He's all about his gold watch. In the movie, he talks about, hey, if you want this gold watch or you want this fast car, you want this, you want that.
Performative status symbols and not actual quality.
Yeah, he's just about bling. He's not saying, hey, if you get this big commission in, you can go and build a bigger food kitchen down the street and help more people to get fed. He's talking about, hey, you can go buy a bigger gold watch, then you can get a bigger car, and that'll help you get your next big deal. I mean, that's how these guys think.
It's interesting because you said these guys, right? I wanted to ask you about the rise of these nationalist regimes or parties with this very populist rhetoric in so many countries around the world, not just the usual suspects like Russia, China, North Korea, Venezuela, Argentina, but also Hungary, even in Germany, which has been very staunch about not letting that kind of rhetoric back into their politics, even France, to say nothing of the Trump administration in the US. You can buy this gold watch if you just follow me is at the core of their political message or their economic strategy. What do you think it is that is making this kind of leader so much more appealing in recent years?
Yeah, I guess if I had the answer, I might be richer than Alec Baldwin. But certainly from the point of view of American politics, Muhammad Ali was very widely quoted as having used the shortest poem ever written, which was "Me, we." I often say to friends in the UK, in some ways you can define American politics like that. And they say, well, what do you mean? I say, well, you could say that the Democratic Party is the party of we, and the Republican Party is the party of me. And if you take that and you look at populism that's emerging all over the world, if there's one thing that these people seem to have in common is they're all very, very, and when I say these people are populists, the people who are described generally as being of the right, though not always, they're very, very focused on making themselves and their closest friends as wealthy as possible. They don't come up with policies that are good for everyone. That's universal, really, in their approach.
When someone votes for a leader, whether it's on the left or the right, they do it because they believe that this leader is going to benefit them. As far as the me and the we goes, they believe it will either benefit them personally, individually, or a group of people that they belong to or that they want to support. So if that's the approach to make myself richer as this autocratic leader, why would somebody vote for me then? I'm not going to help them at all based on that description. Not trying to be a devil's advocate here, but I've had these kinds of conversations with
You're
people.
doing a very good job. I can see a tail behind you and that.
But it's fascinating to me because you've actually studied the US political system in
Yeah,
school. Most American citizens, we were not taught anything besides an overview of the history of the founding fathers, the Continental Congress, maybe the Vietnam War, some civil rights, and then they kind of move on. And you're not taught the ins and outs of the functionality of the current political system. You're not taught a lot of things that really influence how people see the American political system from without and within. But then aside from that, what we're talking about is this global phenomenon. So I'm asking, why would someone vote for someone like this? Because I truly don't understand it myself. But maybe you have an insight that I don't.
after being involved with Democrats abroad for a few years and being probably too engaged in this stuff, I would say that one of the big issues is apathy. People just aren't engaged. They're getting bombarded with information. They're busy with their lives, with their families, with their jobs, dealing with all the problems that you and I have. And they've only got so much space for their non-working interests. And many people don't find this either interesting or engaging. In fact, more and more we're seeing people getting switched off by it. Gosh, I don't blame anyone. Especially given where things are at the moment. There is massive propaganda. There's relentless messaging. If you have a look at a chart which sets out all the media companies that exist, and I'm talking about news organizations, then more recently, all the organizations that are engaged in podcasting, video clips, and that sort of thing. Well, there are vast numbers of them, and you can look at them all and say, well, are you a centrist organization or right-wing leading organization or a left-leaning organization? Well, the way the world has gone is that there are less and less organizations that take sort of a central line and try hard to deliver fact and truth, and more who are spinning it one way or the other. We're all subject to propaganda, but there are far more organizations now spreading the news of the right and populists. You know, it's an attractive message if you think about it. If you think about it in terms of ordinary people who are slogging their guts out, trying to pay all the bills, trying to pay the rent, trying to pay food, school fees, you know, whatever cost they have. Someone coming along and saying, oh, I'm going to make all your problems go away and you're going to have more money to spend at the end of the month. That's very attractive.
People are just trying to get by and they think that this person's promising them a way to do that.
Yeah. And what seems to have become the case in modern politics, and both sides are to some extent guilty of this, is the pursuit of power has meant that often truth has been put to the wayside. These folks, left and right, are so transfixed by the idea of controlling the levers of power that they're willing to say literally anything to get that person to put an X on the ballot. So for the audience, for ordinary people, they're getting bombarded with messaging. It's contradictory, inconsistent, doesn't seem logical, and it's driving people away. I mean, in the election just gone in 2024, I don't have, again, stats, but the winner of the US election in terms of the percentage of the total did not vote. So more people did not vote than voted for Donald Trump or for Kamala Harris.
Do you think the echo chamber of social media is something that is causing more harm than good, based on what you're saying? It's so pervasive in our lives, social media in general. And of course, it was a huge part of the election. I think both sides thought it would be to their advantage to kind of saturate the market, but you're saying that maybe...
Yes. Yeah, we did. My wife is very involved in AI and has had a long career in Silicon Valley, and I've been involved in digital stuff myself, digital marketing, digital ads. And we have a lot of friends who work there in California in these big organizations. One of the biggest conversations around the dinner party table down there these days is about which school they're sending their kids to that ban the kids in the school from having any access to social media while they are there. So these are the same people who are running these businesses and fighting tooth and nail against any regulation, who are so busy sending their kids to schools where they can be protected from social media. I mean, to me, you don't need to go further than that. We have to protect children from it, but also look at adults. I can't think of anyone that I know who wouldn't say, if you said to them, well, you know, do you ever end up doom scrolling through Instagram or whichever whichever platform of choice you choose to use, well, I think everyone's going to say, yeah, I do. I waste far too much time. And it doesn't really give me any answers. To your question, I think it's devastating. I think it all needs to be regulated. The fact that these guys are completely shielded from any lawsuits, it helped build an amazing industry. But at the same time, everyone's got to start recognizing the damage that it's doing, not to the right or to the left, but to absolutely everyone.
They've done studies based on how it affects your brain chemistry and all kinds of things, yeah. You mentioned regulation, and of course we're talking about regulating these companies that are based in the US, but they'd have to be regulated outside of the US as well. But that reminded me, I promise, last devil's advocate question, and then I'll put my tail away. These companies, they would have to be regulated in other territories besides the US, but let's say they were regulated for now only in the US. That policy decision would affect the rest of the world. So this leads me to, I think, a very important question in this context. People have asked me before, as an American living overseas, okay, you're from there, but why does it matter to you in a policy context what happens in America? Like, you live here. So healthcare, women's reproductive rights, consumer protections, voting, climate policy, US immigration policy, gun control, LGBTQ rights, all this stuff could be interesting as a theoretical discussion, but why does what happens in America matter to expats? And not only on like a existential way, is there a practical repercussion for us and for the rest of the world?
I've been thinking myself a lot about that since the election, because if I'm honest, I had fears about what would happen once Donald Trump was the president again. And right now it's kind of exceeding our worst expectations. It's shocking. It's really, really shocking. But why do I care? Well, the fact is I grew up in the UK, and it may seem ridiculous, but we always saw America as, in the end, being the bright shining light on top of the hill. Churchill once said, or is supposed to have once said, America will always do the right thing once it's exhausted all other alternatives. Right? Well, boy, right now, they're really going through the book of possibilities. I think that America is a leader in the world for so many things. And if it disappears, it makes everything harder for everyone else. It's a standard to which everyone else can compare themselves.
And by it, you mean what the country stands for, not the country itself, because it's unlikely to go away. But if it turns into Russia 2.0, how's that going to affect the balance of power in the Western world?
Well, one would say that America has always had these sort of crazy moments. In our lifetimes, there have been plenty of them. But in amongst the crazy things that have happened, there have also been incredible good things. The cultural shift at the end of the 60s, and peace and love, and the renewal of economic growth, and the way the country moved forward, education and so on. Yeah, it's incredible. And I have friends who are educators, and they've been to the top universities in the US. They describe it as being the best system in the world, leading the world in terms of education. Now, these guys seem to be very keen to smash all that up, but up until now, that's what it's been. So for all of its faults, America has been a leader in the world of so many things.
That brings me to the other question I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned apathy, right? So there are a lot of people who are incredibly civically engaged, who are doing a lot to try to fight the good fight, if you want to put it that way. But why is civic engagement important, especially for those of us who are living overseas, particularly voting? There's approximately 10,000 American citizens living in Catalonia alone. Do you feel like the political engagement of the people, the expats living abroad, as well as the people at home, is providing a counterbalance?
Well, I think actually my sense at the moment in Catalonia and Spain generally is actually Americans here, by comparison with the rest of the world, are pretty engaged, and they're really looking hard for things to do. There are protests going on. We've had 2 in Barcelona so far, down by City Hall, and we got hundreds of people showed up for them. In the old days, if we got like 15 people showing up, that was almost a reason for celebration. What's very interesting actually is the reaction of Catalans and Spanish people. You have conversations with them, and I say, we're here, it's very kind of you to let us protest, we really appreciate that, but we recognize we're guests. And they're like, we had a dictator, we're still getting over it, you guys need to do more. because in America they're not doing enough. So I would say there's some engagement. I would say that the people who still hold leadership positions back in the US, they seem to be doing a bit more now, but they are not doing enough. So we've got a lot of work to do. The Democratic politicians, they don't have majorities in the houses, but they're not putting forward legislation. They could be putting forward legislation that would be popular. If you want, I'll give you an example. The Democrats should be putting forth legislation demanding that people who run government departments should undergo regular drugs tests. If you look at what's going on with immigration, ICE, we've all seen all the clips on TV where these ICE guys, they're not wearing identification. Even the IDs they're using don't seem to be clear. They always wear masks. Well, if they were official, they should be properly identified. They should not be wearing masks. Why are the Democrats not putting forward legislation into the Congress to make sure that they do? They have belatedly started asking questions to the department heads, but they need to start putting the legislation forward.
So as Americans abroad and at home, when you see things happening that are really pushing the bounds of not only constitutionality, but also what you talked about, this concept of what America is supposed to be and supposed to represent for all of its faults. Why do you think there hasn't been a bigger pushback from the Democratic lawmakers? These are the people who are elected to protect the system. So even if it's not going to be fun, why has the response been so disorganized and slow? I know the Democrats are not known for always being able to come together in as cohesive a way in terms of messaging as the Republicans are, but these are extreme times to not be able to formulate a response.
Yeah. I might lean a bit into theory. So we've had a situation where the Democrats generally have been reactive all the time rather than being proactive. What I mean by that is we just didn't want to believe that what they were going to do was going to be as bad as it is starting to turn out. And so we didn't take measures that would be responsive to what could be. We've only been taking measures that are responsive to what's happening now.
Which kind of makes me want to ask you, aside from your activism and volunteer work, you mentioned that you've worked with startups, you've worked with tech companies, businesses, designing marketing strategies, and some of these have a socio-political aim. Some of them are sports television platforms, right? So in terms of marketing and messaging and how to convert a message into actionable, real results, like someone takes the step of actually donating to the cause or buying the product or voting a certain way. You're kind of an expert in this stuff. So what's the key to that?
What you're really asking is the same question I keep asking myself at the moment, which is, what's the bloody solution to all this?
The interesting thing, though, is somebody could ask, what's the solution to launching your new ad campaign for your new startup? Isn't it kind of the same, just reaching people and making them realize, I've got to do something about this?
In the framework of Democrats Abroad, anyway, which is focused on getting Americans overseas to vote and hopefully getting them to vote Democrat. The first part of it is just getting them into the mind to vote. And that means a lot of education, a lot of reach out. It means that we have to fundraise because reaching out costs money.
Hey there, U.S. citizens abroad. Did you know that U.S. citizens overseas have a right to vote in U.S. elections? Well, you do.
We have to do a lot of negotiation with platforms.
Just to clarify, if someone said, I'm a diehard Republican, I want to register to vote, I'm living overseas, you'd help them register to vote?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. The main platform we use is something called votefromabroad.org for registration, and anyone can go on there. They have to be a US citizen qualified to vote. That's it. That's the only restriction. You have to be a US citizen.
What about all these claims specifically by the Trump administration that expat voting, voting from abroad, mail-in voting, that this encourages fraud, specifically by people who are not American citizens? Is that possible to vote if you're not an American citizen?
This speaks to the broader problem with politics generally now, is that they make huge accusations and then when they're asked to provide real evidence or proof, they can never provide it. I mean, I think the numbers of, again, I don't want to speak in terms of vague facts, but I seem to recall that the 2 or 3 cases of fraud that were identified in 2020 where there were people prosecuted and convicted amounted to like less than 10 votes in different states. So prove it, provide evidence. Donald Trump, 5 years on, is still saying that the 2020 election was rigged. There have been 60 court cases, all of which said that it wasn't, and yet he's still saying it's rigged. Anything that they've put forth has been disproved in the courts.
This is an interesting question because the concept of a fact used to mean one thing only. I believe it was his press secretary during his first term that came up with the concept of alternative facts?
That was George Conway's wife.
You said your wife works with AI. So between AI, which on one hand is an amazing tool, but on the other hand, it can be potentially dangerous when you don't know if an image is real or not. And then you have world leaders saying things are facts that are empirically untrue. So in this climate that we're in now, where people don't know what's true and what's not, if someone wants to get involved in grassroots activism, what do I do? Especially in this climate of tech and also of ethics where facts don't really apply. What should somebody do if they want to make a difference?
Well, I think one of the things that someone should do if they want to make a difference is look to their own truthiness as to what they're doing. If they're going to be involved in digital media or make comments, be careful to try and stick to the facts. If you look at this interview, I've suggested a couple of things where I didn't have the exact information in front of me, but I've gone with it as a general point in the conversation, but tried to highlight that perhaps my facts weren't clear. But generally speaking, I think we all have to conduct ourselves in a way to the best of our ability conveys the truth. That's all we can do. This is a real moment that the US and the world is going through. And if people feel that they want to engage and do something, now is the moment to do it. And they can do something either at home by writing to their Congress people. I know it seems ridiculous, but letters actually work. If you write a letter to your congressperson, they read them. Emails, not necessarily so good, but a letter with a stamp, they'll read it. Write the letter. If you didn't get everything in the first letter, write another letter. This is an important time. It's probably the most momentous time in US history. I don't know, since the Vietnam War anyway. Maybe since World War II, maybe since before. But this is momentous. Get active, stick to the truth. That's what I would say. In time, things will improve for sure, and I believe that. And I think that if everyone steps up and does their bit now, they'll improve quicker and better.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always. All these people who are kind enough to give their time to me, to us on the Metropolitan Culture Corner, they're all super busy. So I'm always so grateful that they take the time to come and talk to us and explain their opinions, explain their perspective, explain their lives. And it would not be possible without you. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Metropolitan Culture Corner once a month. And if there is anyone that you would like to see featured on our monthly interview series, please drop us a comment below and let us know. In the meantime, see you next month. Thank you for supporting local art and culture. And remember to head to the Barcelona Metropolitan website for the full archive of our over 50 interviews, and of course for a full rundown of all the events, music festivals, happenings that will be going on this summer. It's all right there on the website to keep you entertained during the hot months that are coming up.